Glory to Ukraine, the defense forces, and death to the enemy. I'm Fakhrudin Sharafmal, speaking with legal analyst Andriy Vihirinsky to discuss key international topics. Andriy, good to see you. Good morning, Farid. Let's start our conversation today with a publication that was published on Reuters. Journalists write that the Americans confirm the participation of DPRK troops in the war in the Kursk region. And if they are to be believed, the United States and its leadership are already familiar with the fact that North Korean troops have already had clashes with defense forces. But does this familiarity with the situation and their awareness that the DPRK is involved in the war affect anything? Yes, this is good information. We just got it a little bit earlier, and we trust our source in the intelligence department more than American sources trust our sources in Ukrainian intelligence. Then the key issue is cause and effect, that is, the reason or information about the reason that has already become credible to the Americans. This means that, yes, they are there, and the clashes have already taken place. Then the next question is the consequence of using this information. From the Ukrainian position, we expect a consequence that will show effectiveness and determination, not only in terms of informing, but also changing our position. We expect a decision from the White House, where Joseph Biden is now, that responds to our request for the ability to strike deep into the territory of the Russian Federation, including Korean units, with American weapons and guidance systems, which we also need. Apparently, this framework was set for us by our military and political leadership, in particular Andriy Borisovich Yermak and Volodymyr Oleksandrovich Zelensky, who see this outcome as an effective response by the United States and other partners confirm the fact that Russia used North Korean troops in this war. As of November 7th, 8:03 a.m., there is no such information about effective measures. Can they be taken? I tend to think not. I cannot say more, unfortunately or fortunately. We do not have up-to-date information on the events in the Kursk sector and the state of holding of Ukrainian positions that are determined to form a strong negotiating position. How effective the influence of North Korean troops on the situation is, and how long this foothold can be held, is also unknown.
І скільки часу цей плацдарм є таким, що його можна утримувати. Тому, не розуміючи, не знаючи інформації в цілому про ситуацію там на полі бою, не знаючи кількість військовослужбовців...
Therefore, without knowing the overall situation on the battlefield, the number of Russian military personnel involved in the operation to dislodge Ukrainian troops, it would be a limited form of analysis or presentation of information to rely only on the fact of the North Koreans' presence and demand missiles to hit their locations.
Тому, за великим рахунком, Reuters лише повідомило те, що сьогоднішнього дня, так само як американські...
As a result, Reuters reported this in the same way that the American people learned about the next president for the next 4 years, and that the North Koreans are present in Europe and are fighting on the side of the Russian Federation against the Ukrainian armed forces. Unfortunately, this information has not been developed in terms of how you have reacted to this, or will you react at all. The most interesting part is that while the Americans are far away, the Europeans, closer geographically to the Kursk region, haven't shown any readiness to strengthen our defense, even though the Korean army
географічно ближче до країн Балтії, до так чи інакше до Польської Республіки, да? А ви як реагуєте? І від них теж, о диво, немає ніяких повідомлень про те, що вони готові посилювати нашу обороноздатність. Хоча, корейська армія за кількістю військовослужбовців,
with commitments to Russia, could pose a military threat from Belarus.
Між Кореєю і Російською Федерацією дійсно, з огляду на те, що вона може використовувати як плацдарм на
We are assessing this from the perspective of a potential threat from the point of view of Europe, a threat that may arise someday. You are being shown a tool that can actually be used, and even though the Polish army's plan is, say, 300,000 troops, Korea has more than 1 million.
Навіть при тому, що план польської армії це, допустимо, там 300 тисяч військовослужбовців, в Кореї їх більше мільйона.
Therefore, from the point of view of the cost of personnel, from the point of view of the tool that Putin has acquired in the framework of cooperation with North Korea, it turns out that our partners read the signal associated with the presence of 10,000 Korean troops, or 11,000 or 12,000, as one to which they do not want to respond because they are likely to take into account the risks to themselves. Those risks are related to continental or land warfare, as the number of personnel is decisive, along with the availability of precision weapons. Under these circumstances, it seems that the Reuters information that reached the White House and the Pentagon, showing their awareness of this fact almost a month after the Ukrainian intelligence or political elite pointed it out, will not meet with any reaction. And if it does not meet with a reaction, we can assume that our European partners seem to be waiting for the moment when the operation of Russian forces, which they call anti-terrorist, will end in success for them and, accordingly, failure for us, due to the ousting of Ukrainian troops. After that, the Koreans will return to their places of deployment and stationing on the Korean peninsula, and thus the situation will resolve itself, because their behavior indicates exactly that. In this case, the next question sounds logical, perhaps even in context. Mariana Bezula wrote that the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, is preparing the withdrawal of defense forces from the Kursk region. She drew this conclusion based on his posts on social media, where he reports on 3 months of work in the Kursk region, talks about losses among Russians, and about awards for our military. How realistic do you think this scenario is, especially against the backdrop of the significant replenishment of Russian troops by North Koreans?
Давай так, це не варіант розвитку подій, це форма інтерпретації інформації від главкому. І ця форма інтерпретації, її, що вона інтерпретує? Вона інтерпретує звіт. Звіти бувають фінальні.
And we are not even mentioning the fact that their mobilization is still ongoing. That is, this is not a scenario, but a form of interpretation of information from the commander-in-chief. Reports can be both final and interim.
Взято в полон стільки-то, досягнуто такого-то, такого-то результату. Операція продовжується. Окей, ми знаємо, що через місяць він виходить знову і каже, ми з цього часу зайняли стільки-то, взяли в полон.
If we were talking about consistency, where the commander-in-chief issues a monthly report on the results of the operation, indicating the number of occupied territories, prisoners taken, destroyed equipment, and enemy losses, then receiving the third report could be seen as a continuation of previous assessments.
Певної обмеженої гласності і прозорості про те, для чого ця операція була, що вона носила в тому числі військові цілі, які пов'язані безпосередньо з бойовими діями, і вона
Thus, if the reports came from the president's office or from Syrsky within the last 3 months, they should be considered as interim conclusions.
Офісу президента чи від Сирського протягом останніх 3 місяців, і варто розглядати теж як проміжні висновки. Але пані Мар'яна відноситься до інформації на 3-му місяці операції як до фактично підведення підсумків, підсумковий звіт з даного приводу. І, в принципі, це не позбавлено логіки.
But Ms. Mariana perceives the information on the 3rd month of the operation as an actual summing up, which has its own logic. We sometimes forget what our political leadership used to call the goals of the operation in Kursk. We used to focus on the strategic goal of creating a strong negotiating position, an opportunity to sit down at the negotiating table with Russia, having the trump card of control over the territory to force Russia to retreat from the occupied territories in Ukraine. More pragmatic, tactical goals were discussed, such as drawing enemy forces from the Eastern Front and replenishing the exchange fund. The conscripts guarding the Kursk region, along with their families, put pressure on Russia's leadership, making them more likely to agree to the exchange. The exchange of those who are valuable and invaluable to us, the defenders of Azovstal, other military personnel, etc., was also a stated goal. In general, we heard a lot of goals related to the operation of the Ukrainian armed forces in Kursk region.
Пов'язаних із операцією українських збройних сил в Курщині. І, в принципі, з огляду на цей весь плюралізм і цю палітру, ми можемо говорити за будь-яких умов, що навіть...
The capture of Russian servicemen can be seen as an achievement, highlighting the operation's success.
Ціль, яка демонструє успішність проведення операції.
If we are talking about the Russian military grouping centered in Kursk, which consists of 30 to 40,000 personnel, plus Koreans, then we can say that yes, we were able to concentrate certain enemy forces in this area, which we created or initiated. Despite significant reserves, this slowed the Russian offensive in the east. Without it, they could have advanced faster. With winter here, the terrain has changed, allowing for troop movement, giving us time to regroup and boost morale.
І змінилося все-таки характер рельєфу і можливість просування військ. Ми виграли той час, який дозволить нам перевести подих, змінити морально-бойовий дух.
There are many ways to present the Kursk operation's results. However, I believe there's no reliable source with complete information like we get from military observers in the east and south. The information from Kursk is varied and often not optimistic, but some details cannot be disclosed due to security reasons. Therefore, Mariana Bezugla, a person who has rarely been wrong in her assessments in recent years, concludes that there is a reporting to the public about a successful operation.
Збереженням певної інформаційної таємниці ділитися в ефірі не можна. Тому Мар'яна Безугла, людина, яка останнім часом не так, щоб помилялася, на жаль, в своїх оцінках і прогнозах, робить прогноз про те, що, в принципі, відбувається звітування перед суспільством про цілком успішну,
which at some point may be completed on the wave of success.
на хвилі успіху може бути завершено.
At the same time, it should be understood that the success or failure of an operation can only be assessed if there is complete information, not just information that presents the initiatives and results of the operation in a positive light. These are different things, because the military has access to complete information and decides what to disclose and what not to disclose. It is likely that Mariana will eventually have a heavy burden to continue her campaign of criticizing the commander-in-chief and the decisions related to the launch of the operation. She may become the entity that will make public the information that Syrskyi does not share, such as the number of personnel losses, irreversible and returnable losses, and losses in equipment and supplies. If the operation is completed, and if Russia's plans, which are already being voiced by some of their military analysts, not correspondents, but analysts, are implemented, plans that include a repetition of a scenario similar to what we saw in the Kharkiv region, when after certain offensive actions the enemy creates a buffer zone or a zone of control on the enemy's territory, then we will see this part.
На території Харківської області, що після
It is also noticeable that airstrikes on the territory of Sumy region, in particular on Sumy, have become more frequent, and part of the population has been forced to evacuate from Sumy and Sumy region.
Так само побачимо. Попри те, що дійсно ми уже те, що можемо сприймати, і те, що можемо розуміти, що як мінімум удари з використанням авіації по території Сумщини і по Сумам безпосередньо, вони стали частішими. Те, що частина населення вимушена евакуйовуватись,
This is a fact that we observe, but these events are separated in time, and no one puts them in a logical series in their heads. But the information that Mariana has published, among other options, has the right to be interpreted in this way. But it is not definitive information. It is something that we still have to partially get to know.
Можливо, колись, коли Мар'яна оприлюднить ті відомості, які їй стануть відомі по ціні цієї операції, як для території України, так і для особового складу.
If Mariana eventually publishes data on the cost of the operation for Ukraine and its personnel, comparing it with positive results, it could strengthen her argument for a change in military leadership. This belief is evident in her social media posts. Unfortunately, with no other sources of information, we're forced into an institutional conflict. On the one hand, we have the commander-in-chief. On the other hand, the political supreme commander. And on the other hand, a member of parliament who, unfortunately, is often right in the information she publishes. The choice of position or understanding of the dynamics is left to each listener or viewer, who will be able to form their own opinion when the information becomes available for understanding. It can also show the reaction of society, what it thinks about it, and how it reacts. But, as always, this is not definitive information, and we will have the opportunity to observe and discuss. Meanwhile, Russian journalists report that Putin congratulated Trump through third parties, although it is difficult to accept such information. Western journalists have written that, on the contrary, Russia is happy that Trump could become president, as Trump himself has said he has a good relationship with Putin.
Мені важко якось сприйняти цю інформацію. Журналісти з Washington Post писали про те, що навпаки на Росії раді про те, що Трамп стане президентом, бо і як сам Трамп казав, ми з Путіном в хороших стосунках і так далі. Тобто на Росії, можливо, там не те, щоб в захваті від його президентства, але, в принципі, покладають на це якісь надії, як і ми, зрештою. То можна було б і особисто привітати.
In Russia, they may not be quite as excited, but they have certain hopes, just like we do. I could have congratulated him personally, but, this is Putin. He often demonstrates an understanding of the political position of other leaders.
І коли в нього перед самітом Брікса запитували, що ж там ваші відносини з Бразилією, ви ж поїдете там на саміт.
When asked before the BRICS summit about relations with Brazil and a possible trip to the G20 summit in Brazil, he told reporters that if he went, it would be a media event around the question of whether he would be arrested, not to discuss the business of the summit.
Журналістської спільноти країн-членів, скажімо, чи учасників Бріксу, да? Каже, для чого зривати Захід? Ми, там, грубо кажучи, з Лулою поспілкувалися, один одного зрозуміли.
I believe that I should not disrupt an event organized by a country that we respect. That is, it has accepted the position of the host country, and presence is not risky in terms of possible arrests or liquidations. However, this can seriously undermine the event itself, affecting the image of the host country as a democracy, even though this country maintains relations with Putin, including trade, economic, financial, and diplomatic relations. It looks like disrespectful creation of discomfort for the host country. This example demonstrates the consistency of the approach, because last year, at the G20 summit, there was a similar situation. And Putin also motivated his position with similar reasons. Why discredit the event and create discomfort for the country? That accepts it. Now, coming back to Trump, part of the world was in mourning yesterday. And this was reflected in a number of miserable publications in the various press, including in our social networks. Part of the world was in obvious mourning, which was expressed in posts, publications, and articles. Where, in fact, if you generalize them, no one knows what will happen. But if anything, it's all biblical punishment for the righteous American people who voted for Donald Trump because you made your biggest mistake in life. Mistakes like alcohol, smoking, or drug use are personal and should be condemned. But a national-level mistake makes the world lose faith in you. It was a cry from Yaroslavna that was hard to watch. And to this whole enchanting bouquet of despair was added the fact that we told you that Putin was betting on Trump. You see, he called him himself and congratulated him. This confirms that Trump gave him tests for COVID, and Elon Musk and Putin spoke to each other 15 times during the full-scale invasion.
І Ілон Маск з Путіним зідзвонювався по 15 разів за час повномасштабного вторгнення. Ну все, тепер от точно ми...
Now we definitely have a Kremlin candidate in the White House, and it's all your fault, Americans. However, the context did not involve an official call within the framework of relations between the United States and Russia, where President Joseph Biden did not plan to communicate with the leader of the Russian Federation.
Лідером Російської Федерації. Політикум Сполучених Штатів не комунікує з лідером Російської Федерації.
U.S. politicians don't communicate with Russia's leader, and suggesting that Trump won in 2016 or may win again with Russia's help is short-sighted. A long, difficult process lies ahead to rebalance U.S.-Russia relations.
З огляду на те, що дійсно між Росією і Сполученими Штатами попереду нас очікує затяжний, тривалий і складний процес віднайдення якогось нового балансу у відносинах.
It is this one that no one knows what it will be like, because it will be focused on, first of all, rather on issues related to strategic security, then on issues of allied and partnership relations, which can also be seen as a moment of allied partnership, meaning for each of the parties and for each country separately. This could be Russia's relations with China, or separately, the relations of the ASEAN or AUKUS with the United States. This will also be a modified relationship, an untested channel of communication, in a situation where we have to actually go the distance from the previous administration, which communicated with the Russian side only at the level of the leaders of the intelligence services, but not at the level of advisors, national security secretaries, or national security advisors, or the Secretary of State as foreign minister. There was no such communication. At best, there was communication at the level of defense ministers. Yes, it happened. It cannot be ruled out. But given that Mr. Donald Trump is not yet a decision maker and has not acquired presidential powers, he cannot have the tools that, say, Joseph Biden's White House administration has, where there is at least Lloyd Austin, who in the event of a crisis can call Shoigu, once Shoigu Belousov, and talk on the red or white phone about pressing issues. And likewise, Mr. Trump does not have his own Bill Byers who can take off and talk to Patrushev or Narishkin, who will pass on the information to Putin. But given the fact that Mr. Donald Trump is an individual, a citizen of the United States who won the election and was almost impeached, there have been attempts to initiate and special investigations into Russian interference in the election in his favor. Today, communication is direct with official notifications on the Kremlin's website, and the question is whether the parties confirm it. Official communication happens through proper channels, and investigations show that it's easy to access information on official emails or phone calls, even in courts. Moreover, candidates and politicians must also keep their correspondence, and it is not so easy for them to clear their call history. From the point of view of the American justice system, it is not really difficult to get permission or access to iMessages or FaceTime calls, so the means of communication are limited because they will be turned out and used to discredit them later. Without an announcement on the Kremlin's website or a notification from Trump's press service, could they have conveyed congratulations to each other? It's a diplomatic step. Even she congratulated Trump, despite knowing his policy towards China might not be friendly. Diplomatic relations prioritize the person who won fairly, with a large competitive advantage, over personal visits or future questions.
Вторинним, а первинним є те, що є людина, вона отримала певний пост, отримала його в чесній демократичній боротьбі.
The protocol says that we should congratulate him, despite the fact that the whole of Europe, as some publications write, took a convulsive grip on the heart and all other parts of its body, thinking about how we will live in the Trump era. But European leaders called Trump and congratulated him, despite the attacks during his other term. From the point of view of official communication rhetoric, he did not welcome it. From the point of view of unofficial communication rhetoric, even without an evidence base, American publications managed to cast a shadow that there is a friend of Putin's in Trump's circle who can transmit certain signals. Who is this friend? I don't know. But take Elon Musk. We've heard that he communicated with Putin, so maybe they passed it on through him. Elon Musk is not a president and doesn't implement international policy. His relationships with leaders stem from his capital and business, not his position. They result from his work as a businessman, visionary, and developer.
І він їх має за рахунок того, що в нього є диверсифікований бізнес, той бізнес, якому зацікавлена навіть країна, в якій цей бізнес знаходиться. Тому його всі відносини...
And so, if Putin, through Peskov or through Dima Medvedev, texted him and said, "Say hello to Donnie for me," or "Our first sends greetings to your elected one," there's nothing wrong with that, because both sides understand that today's communication is direct, by direct connection.
Наш перший передає вітання вашому обраному. Немає тут нічого страшного. Просто бо обидві сторони розуміють те, що сьогоднішня комунікація їхня безпосередньо там по прямому зв'язку.
The world isn't morally or psychologically ready for it, so the greeting isn't a sign of special relations. Peskov stated Russia is committed to dialogue, but the White House hasn't shown readiness for it, which is true.
Тому що офіційна позиція так чи інакше вона прозвучала від Пескова. Песков озвучив позицію, що ми налаштовані на діалог, були налаштовані взагалі і завжди, але від Білого дому комунікація типу чи
To imagine that the Democratic administration would engage in a dialogue with the Russian Federation at a time when they said that all political issues related to the end of the war were the responsibility of Ukraine, and they would not conduct any negotiations or dialogues, was a constant refrain.
І ніяких переговорів чи діалогів вони вести не будуть, вони звучали постійно. І Джозеф Байден
Since Biden started the war, he couldn't end it politically or diplomatically. The Democratic administration couldn't communicate with Russia, but if the White House now supports ending it through diplomacy, they allow communication, possibly with intermediaries.
Якщо інша сторона, змінена позиція Білого дому з точки зору фізичної особи президента, каже, що треба завершувати шляхом дипломатії, значить, в принципі, вони допускають форму комунікації.
The third point Peskov made was that Russia will achieve its goals. While the plans of the United States are important, Russia believes it has the resources and political capacity to reach its objectives. He emphasized a tough stance, asserting that a new president cannot simply dictate terms and expect Russia to comply. Russia, therefore, seeks a dialogue of equals. The interests of both sides should be equally considered. If there's no president, the elected one lacks powers. However, communication between Trump and Putin is within acceptable means.
Ну і за таких умов є офіційна позиція. Всі офіційні позиції зроблено пас до дипломатії, коли президент обраний не буде своїх повноважень. А з точки зору комунікації фізичної особи...
It is quite, I honestly don't think that Donald Trump...
Путіна, да? Ну, вона цілком в рамках, ну, скажімо, допустимих засобів комунікації, вона цілком можлива.
Or any other leader or president will sit and make notes of who congratulated him on his birthday, who sent him a telegram, who congratulated him on his election, and say, since this one congratulated me, this one is good. That's it. Give this one $1 billion. But for that one, who did not congratulate me, take away the $1 billion they owe us. It's somehow so mundane and childish that only infantile, childish societies can perceive information in this way. But reputable sources say that this makes them simply less respectable in terms of the maturity of society and the maturity of, I don't know, nations. This is probably true, such childish infantilism. But there is room to grow, room to mature. Donnie is a young candidate. You know, maybe he does have this fragment of infantilism. Of course, by the way, these Ukrainian jokes, not jokes, but the despair of the Ukrainian media about Donald Trump's age is a separate story. It's just, you know, how far people are beyond the possibility of even writing their analysis or their publication from the position of plus or minus some kind of objectivity.
Ну, це насправді дивує в поганому сенсі, бо коли вони пишуть про те, що а Дональд Трамп...
It's really surprising in a bad way, because when they write about Trump accusing Joseph Biden of being an adult or of being old, and now he's entering his second term, being a little bit older than Joseph Biden. I mean, Trump is 78, and Joseph Biden was roughly 77 when he took office.
Вони забувають один простий момент. Тези про вік Джозефа Байдена з'явилися тоді, коли він, ну, скажімо, спілкувався з...
They forget one simple point. The thesis about Joseph Biden's age appeared when he, let's say, communicated with the universe on the podium and then did it more than once. That is, there were certain circumstances that were obvious from the point of view of the general public, which gave grounds to say that perhaps the person really has some kind of situation, including health. And then when there were possible diagnoses for this, they looked at it from the point of view of age. But our undoubtedly liberal democratic community removes this factor. There were no airplanes, no ladders, no handshakes in the air, none of this. There was only the age factor. And what should we do now? Okay, now let's talk about the fact that Trump is also an old man. Like, how does this work in people's heads? I don't fully understand, except in an abstract sense, like we're in our own bubble, not noticing what doesn't fit. There's a scientific term for this, which I may write about someday. In the US, 70 to 80 is just the start of a presidential campaign, with much life ahead. In Ukraine, the average life expectancy is 65, but in the US, it's easier. At 70, life is just beginning. I should clarify whether I'm comparing the US or Ukraine. Ultimately, with improvements in medicine, health, and technology, we'll live long, happy lives, even dancing to YMCA at 77, 78.
Про те, що у нас рівень медицини, БАДів, психологічного здоров'я, кількості різноманітних безпілотних апаратів, які літають над головою перед нашим з тобою включенням, да? Вона буде знижуватися, і ми будемо жити довго, щасливо і повноцінно. І танцювати під YMCA на сцені в 77-78 років.
Amen to that. Andriy, thank you very much for the conversation. Thank you to our viewers for watching up to this point. And we won't say goodbye for long, because tomorrow we will see you again on the stream at 10:15. So see you then. See you then.